Hi, good afternoon from London. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Olivia Ibbotson. I'm from Student Young Pugwash UK, and today I'll be chairing the meeting. So today we're going to be discussing the future of the UK's nuclear weapons. Is there an alternative to US dependence? Our speakers will provide an update on the UK nuclear weapons system and the replacement programme with a focus on US technological dependence. In addition, they will consider whether it would be realistic for the UK to develop a truly independent nuclear weapons system, or whether the fundamental choice is between continuous dependence on the US and renouncing nuclear weapons. So, British Pugwash, just briefly introduce, Pugwash is a network of scientists, experts, and members of the public concerned about the social impact of science and technology, particularly the threat posed by nuclear and other weapons of mass destruction. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If we could all kindly stay muted and think on any questions we have throughout the webinar. If we have any questions, please wait until the speakers have finished. You can post them in the chat or raise your hand using the function. Our speakers today, so firstly we have Paul Ingram. Paul was the Executive Director of British American Security Information Council from 2007 to 2019, focusing on nuclear deterrence and disarmament issues in the US, Europe, and Middle East and Asia. Since 2019, he has worked closely with the Swedish Foreign Ministry crafting the Stepping Stones approach. He is a research affiliate and former academic program manager with the Centre for Study of Existential Risk at Cambridge University. David Cullen is a policy fellow at BASIC and program manager of the Emerging Voices Network. He joined BASIC after 8 years at the Nuclear Information Service, where he was the director. David is an expert on the UK nuclear weapons programme. His own publications have covered problematic and technical problems with the programme, plans for new UK and US warheads, and the costs involved. His work focuses on the interrelationship between technology, policy, and politics in relation to weapon systems and disarmament. We're going to begin with David, so over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. So I'd like to talk first of all about the status of the UK and its nuclear weapons program, and particularly the upgrades to that program. And the headline of what I'm going to say is essentially the UK is struggling as it stands to remain a nuclear weapon state. So the Dreadnought program to build new nuclear armed submarines has absolutely ballooned in cost and is substantially behind its original schedule. We don't actually know how far behind the schedule it is because the government does not have a published end date for the program. But all of the data that is in the public domain suggests that it is substantially behind, and the government is desperately trying to make sure that no information gets into the public domain to confirm how far behind it is. So you can see, for example, that the releases that the government has made for its major projects now routinely censor information about the progress to the timetable on the Dreadnought program. You can see also that the Astute program, which is towards the end of building the current generation of nuclear powered but conventionally armed submarines, has been severely delayed, and despite endless protestations that the program was just about to start catching up on itself, it has continued to be plagued by delays and cost overruns. Notably, a couple of years ago, there was a fire at the Devonshire Dock Hall in Barrow, where those submarines were assembled, which will have further delayed the last submarine of this Astute class that is due to be produced. And that's an issue for the Dreadnought program because in Devonport they only have space in that dock hall to assemble 3 submarines at one time. So HMS Dreadnought, the first of the class, is in the dock hall and being assembled, but they will not be able to start work assembling the third of the class until the last Astute submarine is done. So there are a whole host of cascading knock-on interrelated issues that are occurring within the program. The actual real bottleneck, as far as we can tell, for the program isn't at Barrow. even though there are substantial issues there, it's with Rolls-Royce in Derby, which is producing the reactors for the submarines. Um, Maybe there's more to say about that. I can answer some questions in the Q&A, but that's the area where we do have public domain information that's been consistently highlighted as having potential delays for the critical path of dreadnought production, and also being classed as red by the Government Infrastructure and Projects Authority. Um, when when the dreadnought program is finally completed, as the government insists it will be at some point, the delays that I think are going on will have a knock-on effect for the SSN AUKUS program, which obviously isn't directly related to the UK being a nuclear possessor state, but is partially prompted, I believe, by their desire to sort of cross-subsidize Rolls-Royce, which, as I've mentioned, is the bottleneck. So the SSN AUKUS program means that Australia is reliant on the UK to produce nuclear reactors. However, that program itself is being seriously disrupted, or at risk of serious disruption, by the problems within the Dreadnought program. Turning to the relationship with the United States, obviously, a lot of what happens within that relationship is secret, but there are some ways to look at what's in the public domain to understand how it works and what's happening. And as probably most people on this call know, that a couple of years ago, the Mutual Defence Agreement, which is the treaty between the two states that governs that relationship, was renewed indefinitely in 2024. And you can look at, prior to 2024, the treaty was updated every 10 years latterly, and then before that, every 5 years. And you can look at changes made to the treaty over those times about what the two states will share. And looking at those treaty texts together, you can see a growing interdependence, and obviously while there is some interdependence, there's more dependence of the UK on the US than the other way around. So you can see there's a slow, gentle loosening as the relationship progresses, of things that the US will supply to the UK, and only a small amount of supply in the other direction. Although in 2024, one of the changes did allow for the exchange of submarine technology in both directions. And I suspect this, again, is linked to SSN AUKUS, where the idea is that submarine class and US attack submarines will share a number of components and systems. So there's a sort of deepening interdependence there. Thinking about where we are now, I think I said at the time, I'm not sure anybody necessarily agreed with me, but I said at the time I thought that the indefinite extension was prompted by some far-sighted expectation of a possible Trump victory in the US election. I think that it's likely that some people considered it was way too much of a threat to the special relationship, that the treaty had to be regularly reviewed, and it would only take a highly transactional president of Trump's caliber to be in post when a review was happening to decide that this somewhat lopsided relationship was not in US interests, and to refuse to renew it. So to come circle back around to the question, the UK is highly dependent on the US. It is struggling very much to be an independent nuclear weapon state. Obviously, we have a shared missile delivery system, the Trident system, and the UK uses US-made missiles on a sort of time-sharing arrangement, where we have the right to a certain number of missiles from a shared pool. Those missiles are kept in the majority in the US, and they are maintained in the US. And although we do have access to them, we don't have any easy way to replace them. So I don't think there is any easy way that the UK could consider becoming quote unquote independent nuclear weapon state. Our program is so deeply enmeshed with the US one The warhead that we are currently producing is obviously designed to be very similar, if not identical, to the new warhead that the US is producing. There'll be a common re-entry vehicle. For the UK to consider creating a domestic independent system would take years and years of developments, and looking at the dynamics of the relationship and the change in the international outlook for that relationship. If we wanted to be independent from the US in our nuclear weapons program, we needed to have started thinking about that several decades ago, and we haven't. So that's my blunt answer to the question. I look forward to hearing what Paul has to say.
Thank you very much, Dave. If we move on to Paul, thank you.
Great, thanks, Dave. Going to find it difficult to disagree with anything you just said. I hope people can hear me, and that I'm loud enough. Good, thank you. It's a strange question to ask. Could Britain field an independent nuclear deterrent? Because the whole point of the British nuclear deterrent is that it is tied up with the Americans. Ever since Suez, we made a choice. The French went independent. We decided to stick as close to the US as possible, and that's been our number one foreign policy objective ever since. Hasn't changed, isn't likely to change unless there is a change of political colour in government. And I think that's quite interesting since the election last week. But our nuclear weapon systems are indeed deeply entwined, and increasingly so, as David was saying. The ecosystem goes way beyond just the missiles. The Dreadnought Common Missile Compartment is not just the missile compartments themselves. It's a bit of a misnomer. It also includes the crew quarters and the command and control system within the belly of the submarine. So the essence of the submarine is basically designed by the Americans, made jointly. And the warhead is also, as David was saying, very much based on American designs with a British flavour. But the problem is, of course, is that nuclear weapons, the Trident system, and possibly the new F-35A to a much lesser extent, are the growing cuckoo in the military nest, because they are increasing the proportion of the defence budget year on year quite significantly. Originally, we were looking at around 5%. Then in the late 2010s, we're looking at between 8 to 14%. The early 2020s, it's been 14 to 17%. And then in the next few years, it's more likely to be 18 to 20%, bearing in mind that this is an increasing defence budget. So you could almost say that the rest of the defence budget is staying pretty static, even with the commitments to increase, because it's all being sucked up by the military, by the nuclear enterprise. We're looking at a forecast of 120 billion over the next decade. It's quite an extraordinary amount of money. So that's with the US. If we were to choose to go independently of the US, then what are we looking at? Well, we don't have to speculate here outside of government, because the government itself produced the Trident Alternatives Review in 2013 under the coalition government, when the Liberal Democrats were pushing the Conservative majority to go through a reasonably informed process. Although I think in the end they were tricked. But anyway, we had the Trident Alternatives Review at that point. So that is, what is it now? 13 odd years ago. That was happening in parallel with our Trident Commission, and our Trident Commission concluded that Britain could fire missiles, although frankly, sitting in the room, I saw no evidence that we knew that fact. I mean, if you were an American lending your missiles to another country, you would surely install some kind of a kill switch. And certainly kill switches are installed when those Trident missiles are tested. So these are incredibly complex pieces of kit. How can we know? But anyway, the Trident Commission concluded that if the Americans withdrew support for our nuclear system, we would last a matter of weeks, if lucky, perhaps months. But the Trident Alternatives Review considered something in the region of 750 other options to the ballistic missile system on top of submarines. But the serious proposals were for instead dual capable SSNs, that's attack submarines, a fleet of 12 with vertical launch missile tubes, either 5 dedicated ones or a fleet of dual capable ones. And the other option it considered was 36 joint strike fighters or 6 large bombers to deliver air-launched cruise missiles. Both of these options were potentially capable of independent British development. Indeed, they would have to be, because the Americans don't currently field those systems. And the conclusion was that essentially you would be looking at comparable costs for a much lower capable system. And comparable costs, and then adding on to ballistic missile submarines in order to make up for the gap, the time gap. Because the crucial thing here, as David alluded to and they concluded, was that it is taking 17 years for the British to design, develop, certify and produce a ballistic missile-based thermonuclear warhead. And that is using well understood concept with collaboration with the US on non-nuclear components, extensive hydrodynamic trials. Delivering a thermonuclear warhead for an alternative system would take much longer and cost far more. So we're talking about somewhere in the region of 24 years and a cost of maybe 3 or 4 times as much. The problem is the starting point would be much less mature, even if it's building upon previous designs. The facilities at AWE Aldermaston, techniques and expertise would need to be adapted. New non-nuclear components, different from those we procure today from the US, would need to be developed. And we would need to develop an alternative delivery vehicle in parallel, that is the missile. And the risks are enormous. And given, as Dave was saying, the current problems with the program, you can bet your bottom dollar that whilst they were estimating in 2013 it would take 24 years. So if we were to decide today, which is not going to happen, but if we were to decide today that we would, we, the British elite, would change course, our number one foreign policy stance, posture, and we would still attempt to have nuclear weapons, it's most likely that it would take somewhere in the region of 30 years. So we would have to rely upon the Dreadnought system and upon the Americans for a whole generation before we could field at considerable cost and reduced capability. So it really doesn't make any sense. What was I wanting to say as well? I think what we're looking at here is an inflection point in our situation, and I have no hope at all that we will choose the rational choice, which is to relinquish nuclear weapons altogether, to consider leaving NATO, because as the Secretary General said today, NATO is essentially a platform for US projection of power around the world, and that we need instead to be realigning with a focus on common security and diplomacy. This is seen as ideologically impractical by the British elite, and instead they tread this tightrope where they appear to be following international law over Iran, but lasting 48 hours, and then allowing attacks on Iran from British bases. Now, instead, I think what we're going to be seeing is a deepening dependency on the United States. The nuclear systems are just one part of that. Somebody's already asked in the chat about artificial intelligence. The tech industry is deeply penetrating the UK. We, in effect, all of us are paying significant taxes to the United States whenever we use tech today, and we are dependent on the US in every single sense. So, so I think I'll leave it there and leave plenty of time for conversation.
Thank you very much, Paul. Well, I'm sure people have got lots of questions. We have some raised in the chat already. I wondered if Paul would like to unmute and choose one of your questions to ask either. Oh, Tom, sorry. If Tom would like to unmute and ask one of his questions from the chat to Paul or Dave.
Hi, everybody. Well, the question about AI that I asked was simply because here we are in Hertfordshire, near to St Albans, and last week we were asked to go to a public consultation by a company calling themselves Equinix, who are proposing to build a data centre quite close to us. And we went to the consultation, as it were. There were about 80 people there and about eight to 10 representatives of Equinix. And it was, to my mind, a purely PR exercise. I'd heard about the use of AI connecting itself to nuclear reactors in America. So obviously I pushed the question there, and I got a sort of semi-detailed account of how this data center would be water cooled. And there were just a few stages to go with the local council as it presented its safety assessments to the local council. And because they've already bought the land, apparently, in the playing fields of a local school, they expect to build this data center by 2030. So that's just one data center. Now, my understanding is there are probably at least 13 that have been approved by the government. And our MP, as you probably know, Sarah Dowden, who used to be the Digital Services Minister. So I imagine that he had a bit of an input for permissions to AI and data centres in Hertfordshire. The scary thing is, as I think Private Eye revealed this week, that the Department of War and Anthropic used AI tools, and they were used in strikes against Iran, even though there's a spat with the Department of War. And apparently they used it in intelligence assessments, target identification, and simulating battle scenarios. So there you have it. That is another example of our dependence on the US, which Paul and Dave have already indicated.
If either Paul or David wants to take that, it's quite a long question, so I think we might do questions one at a time.
Well, I would just comment that there has been a lot of conversation about the use of AI in nuclear command and control. So coming back to the nuclear specific, and the nuclear weapon states have yet to come to any form of agreement. In principle, they do agree that there needs to be a human in the loop, but that is just a very, very initial issue. It's quite a small issue, because a human in the loop just basically means the AI that is taking in all the sensor data that can't possibly be assessed with any rational basis by a human being because of the speed and the complexity, comes up with it's an 85% probability that you should fire your nuclear weapons now. And of course, the other dimension is that nuclear deterrence is by definition and by nature very fuzzy as a concept. And how you can transfer a fuzzy concept into a digital concept and come out of this with any safety, I think eludes me. And the evidence seems to back the idea that when AI are given control of systems and they fight war games, then we're looking at 95% probability that they escalate against one another to all-out nuclear war. We always knew that that when wargaming, once nuclear weapons are used in small quantities, there is almost never in any wargaming any halt at that point. You know, they'll go all in. So it's incredibly dangerous. So to be bringing in AI as a black box without knowing what's going on underneath, and the fuzzy nature of nuclear deterrence, which has at its core a deep illogic to it, is really scary.
Well, I think David, if he wants to go say anything.
Yeah, David, do you have any comments for Tom?
I think Paul has pretty much covered everything. Yeah, I'm not worried about robots taking over the world. I'm worried about governments giving AI models that are not as intelligent as the hype suggests, control over systems that they shouldn't be allowed anywhere near. I mean, there's always something a bit toe curling when you hear the UK government talking about tech. It's you know the terrifying prospect of people who don't really understand technology getting excited about it. And I think that's, you know, that there's a lot to be said. This is probably outside the scope of today's meeting about what a poor idea it is for the UK economy. But you know, for today's purposes, we can already see in some of the reportage on Israel's genocide in Gaza, what happens when you use AI in targeting. People die. And unfortunately, the militaries of the world are more interested in the prospect of gaining some fractional strategic advantage than they are in creating, you know, global safety, yeah, which is extremely troubling.
Thank you, Dave. If we move on to, we have a question from Aaron. If you'd like to unmute. Aaron Dawson?
Sorry, can you hear me?
That's great. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Great presentation. Good afternoon, all. In terms of my question, it was really focused on the comments that Dave made with respect to the prospect of a Trump victory and how that was featured in the calculations over the extension indefinitely of the mutual defense agreement. I just wondered, but maybe Paul may be able to comment on this as well, the decision by the Trump administration not to conduct a nuclear posture review. Where does that sit in all of this? Does that provide an element of reassurance that the future of the US UK nuclear cooperation is going to continue on the current tracks, or is this just is that hiding something else that we should be worried about? Thanks very much.
Dave, do you want to go first, or shall I? You go first.
Sorry, just muted.
Yeah. Dave, you're muted.
You're muted. Dave, go ahead.
I keep unmuting myself and then it mutes itself again. I don't know what's happening there. Anyway, hopefully this will stay. I'll stay unmuted. Great question, and a good challenge to the point I made. I've been mulling it over since I saw it in the chat. I'm not sure what to make of the Trump's decision not to have a nuclear posture review. One of the things that's been of interest to me, and I haven't had time to write about or sit down with properly, is Trump's national security strategy, which came out last autumn. And as I've been mildly frustrated with myself and my inability to find time to write about it, it's been interesting to sort of reflect on the things that weren't in that. There certainly wasn't anything about Venezuela in there. There certainly wasn't anything to indicate this war with Iran, or how deeply the US would alienate its allies over Greenland, although I think there was some mention of Greenland in there. And it's got me reflecting what the experience must be like to be in a bureaucracy with a man like Donald Trump at the head of it. He's so capricious and unpredictable that writing strategy is kind of a pointless exercise, I think, with someone like that at the helm. So I do wonder. It's always frustrating to have a sort of throwaway response to this, but I do wonder whether nobody could be bothered to write a national security strategy. They'd done that once the first time around, and there wasn't anyone who was particularly interested in it, and that's what it, you know, determines whether something gets done or not in the Trump administration. But there may be more to it. I don't know.
Well, I would just add very quickly that defense spending has gone up 17% in the United States, and nuclear weapons are allocated a disproportionate amount of that increase. So the fact they haven't put out a nuclear posture review does not say that there's anything to be reassuring there. They are ploughing huge amounts of money in, and Trump has demonstrated as that anything he says can't be taken seriously. In fact, I would go opposite. Anything he says about any of his adversaries, you just apply that to him and you get the answer.
Thank you. Thank you both for your comments. I wondered if we could reflect on Ace's comment in the chat, which is a non-nuclear state has the advantage that its AI cannot go nuclear. And I'm going to abuse my position of chair and integrate it into my own question, which is why, in your view, did the UK join the NATO nuclear sharing, and what implications are there for this on UK and EU security? Thank you.
I'm really struggling to unmute again. There we go. Tim, do you have control over whether I'm muted or not? It doesn't seem, I don't seem to be able to do myself.
I
Anyway,
do, but I promise you I'm not muting you, Dave.
okay. My apologies. I'm not quite sure why this is happening. So one of the things I think is worth understanding about the sharing announcement and its sort of companion piece, which was the announcement that the UK was going to switch some of its F-35 order from F-35Bs that can be used on aircraft carriers to F-35As, which can be used to deliver nuclear weapons, nuclear gravity bombs, is that the two were obviously intended to be connected together and to look like the UK was acquiring a new nuclear weapons capability, whilst actually the fact of the matter is the UK is not acquiring a new nuclear weapons capability. The F-35s will, one presumes, be ordered at some point, but they are a number of years off. And the nuclear weapons, which appear to have already been moved to RAF Lakenheath, will remain under US control and would only be used at a time where it was deemed that the Non-Proliferation Treaty was out of the window and we were in a situation of all-out nuclear war. The justification for these weapons was a very different scenario. It was around, I think, a fallacious belief that the UK requires sort of incremental escalatory steps in terms of nuclear escalation in order to deter, a Russian use of a low-yield nuclear weapon. That's a very different scenario. That's a pre-all-out war scenario. So the idea that the UK would have access to these weapons in general circumstances in the particular scenario under which they're being justified is just incorrect. Furthermore, the UK is a very long way from Russia. The F-35s in question would need to be refueled either in the air or on the ground on the way to Russia. It's very hard to imagine, even in an all-out war scenario, them getting to their destination and being a significant strategic factor either way. Which is not to say that we shouldn't be upset about them or bothered by them, or we shouldn't oppose them. I think we should do all of those things. But I think it's important to recognise that the purpose of the announcement was to give the impression that the UK was acquiring a new nuclear weapons capability when in fact it doesn't have one. And would only have access to these weapons in a very extreme scenario with US approval. Yeah, that's what I want to say about that.
So just to say, the nuclear sharing arrangement has no military relevance whatsoever for any of the host states. It always was, always is, and always will be a political arrangement to demonstrate that the NATO non-nuclear weapon states are committed to the NATO's nuclear weapon agenda and nuclear deterrence posture. We used to call it dipping the hands in the blood. I hosted, when I was running BASIC, I hosted a number of workshops around Central and Eastern Europe, to which I invited the principal US diplomat from the mission in Brussels to come over and try to persuade US allies to let go of these things. Because at the time, under Obama, the Americans really didn't want the B-61-12s to be in Europe. It doesn't serve US function militarily. It doesn't serve any nuclear deterrent function. So they are madness. It's even more mad that the British should do this because we already have nuclear weapons. We don't need to dip our hands in the blood because they're already up to our elbows in the blood of nuclear deterrence. So I think personally, it was a decision made by the RAF to acquire aircraft that were more suitable for training purposes. And Starmer saw the opportunity and was able to then say, look, I am big hard man and I'm demonstrating my nuclear credentials. These are political weapons. Nuclear weapons are political weapons by their nature. So I think there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. My only doubt at the end of it is that submarines are really quite vulnerable systems going into the future. We have a number of technologies. A decade ago, when I was at BASIC, we hosted a number of events, published reports about how technology, anti-submarine warfare technology, was developing at pace, using underwater autonomous systems that were networked, very cheap, combining powerful sensors that could penetrate the water at quite significant depths. We're looking at improved computing, data processing, big data, and lots of development of non-acoustic detection techniques such as magnetic anomaly detection, laser radar imaging, other remote sensing tools. And together, this means that even the dreadnoughts, before they hit the water, could be redundant, because what you then have is you have a dreadnought at sea. The Russians take it out. They know it's taken out. We don't know it's taken out. We're in a crisis. It's really dangerous. And research that I've done more recently, particularly from China, in the South China Seas context, demonstrate that this technology that we'd been looking at a decade ago has come along leaps and bounds. And any country that depends upon submarines for its one nuclear deterrent is foolish.
Thank you, Paul. Before we move over to a couple more questions, Lyndon, would you like to unmute, as I seem to have a direct response for the comments made by Paul and Dave?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much. Just to further on this theme, can you just clarify if it is true that the warheads have already been moved to Lakenheath? Beyond what you've said about political signalling, is there any credible military utility? Because if we don't already have the jets to fly them, then why would the US deploy warheads to a foreign country without even the theoretical ability to actually employ them?
Well, because the Americans have aircraft themselves at Lakenheath that could deliver these things. So this is basically Britain being used as an aircraft carrier. As a forward base, as it is right now being used as a forward base alongside other European bases to attack Iran in a completely illegal war.
Thank you. Dave, do you have any? Yeah.
Yeah, just to comment on that quickly. Thanks for the question, Lyndon. The reason that I'm very confident that the weapons were taken to Lakenheath last summer is that Nukewatch did some really excellent open source work. You can see on their website the various pieces of information that demonstrate pretty clearly that aircraft carrying nuclear weapons went to Lakenheath in sort of June or July last year. and unloaded there. I think that's pretty uncontrovertible when you see the information they've assembled. I think there's a really interesting and weird story underlying all of this. The decision to upgrade the bunkers there was taken a number of years ago under a different government. The temporality of these decisions interests me. But yeah, as Paul says, the bottom line is that the only aircraft that can deliver those weapons for quite some time will be US aircraft.
Thank you, Dave. If we move on to a question from Stanislava, if you'd like to unmute. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm conscious I'm in a public space, so if it's too loud, please let me know. This was sort of me immediately wondering, but I guess this has already been answered about a specific kind of UK-France declaration from July about sharing nuclear capabilities and also this is for European defense. So I guess now that we've sort of heard that, it seems that the UK more uses this as signaling, and there isn't really a realistic military deterrent that can be achieved. Do you think that that was also sort of meant to like just be a move for signaling? And have you seen any implications? I don't know if either of you work on kind of like UK EU like security defense cooperation, but have you seen anything come up in like defense discussions? What do you think the outcome kind of would be on the future of UK EU defense cooperation if it seems like there's real bottleneck and none of these things can actually be followed through? Because France is obviously like stepping up in a way with its independent, as we've seen in the past few days. But yeah, that was just my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to get one more question, if that's okay with Dave and Paul, if we have two together. We have a copy.
No, Linda.
Oh, Linda, sorry. Linda, and then we'll do a copy next. Sorry.
Hi. Dave mentioned that Rolls-Royce are causing the major hold-up in the Dreadnought programme. And now they've got to do the AUKUS submarines. So it seems completely bonkers that the government is wanting to give them millions of pounds to design and build SMRs, which are in themselves a nonsense, I'm sure. But why have they chosen Rolls-Royce to do it when they're making so much of a mess of the job they've been doing for many years?
Thank you, Linda. If Paul and Dave would like to comment, thank you.
Okay, so I'll take the France UK one. The French have been talking. I mean, ever since I started my career back in 1989, 1990, I remember going to Warsaw, and the French Ministry of Defense were sponsoring a workshop there where they were talking about French nuclear umbrella. And the Poles and the Baltic states who are represented there were almost laughing into the faces of the French because there was no trust. I don't think that trust has grown at all. So I think there is a lot of skepticism about the French and less so the British. But I think that there's certainly been a lot of development in the nuclear relationship between France and the UK since that time, and I think that there is an interest in the UK and the French demonstrating some kind of skin in the game when the Americans may not have it. I mean, obviously, in this current context, it's quite clear that the break in strategic interest between the US and Europe over the Ukraine war demonstrates that there is a desire to show some level of independent operation. I think France probably is more independent in its operation. There's less independence than they claim around procurement. There's much more cooperation behind the scenes between France and the US than meets the eye in public. But nevertheless, the French are more independent, and they've demonstrated that independence in foreign policy terms, most obviously in the Gulf War of 2003. And indeed, it was the French that called the UN Security Council meeting last week. So I think there is some desire. I would be I would be hesitant to say that the French and the UK nuclear capabilities could be the backbone of some European non-American military alliance, which I think is a fantasy in any case at the moment. But I'm sure that there is some ambition in some parts of the political military establishment for such an arrangement.
I would agree with all of that. Yeah, it's worth saying, I'm sort of dialing back to the F-35 announcement. One of the several audiences for that, alongside sort of appearing tough to the British public and a sort of show of burden sharing in some strange way to Donald Trump. I think part of the audience for that decision was European NATO states and the sort of wanting to create an impression of the UK stepping up in this regard. But to Linda's question, I mean, the UK is stuck. I mean, if you look at sort of UK's relationship with any of its commercial suppliers in the nuclear weapons program, it's like one of those buddy movies where two people who are highly antagonistic are handcuffed together. Only in the UK and its suppliers, that one of them is paying the other one a whole load of money for a very poor job being done. There isn't anyone else in the UK who makes submarine reactors. In fact, because we are reliant on US reactor designs, Rolls-Royce is the only entity outside the US who is given that information and is allowed to operate in this space. So UK is wholly reliant on Rolls-Royce, however bad a job they do. It's really a case of putting up with them and their repeated failures or getting out of the nuclear submarine game. So the UK chooses the former every time.
Thank you. So we have just over 10 minutes left. So I believe if we're direct, we have time for 2 more questions. If we can take questions from Kopi and Joan. Kopi, if you'd like to go.
Yes. Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I can't turn on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, that's good. I just want to ask, I guess, to all speakers, thank you for this presentation, by the way, but I was wondering, to what extent does the UK's reliance on American technical logistical support the UK's nuclear weapon system affect the UK's claimed operational since deploying its nuclear weapons? So, for instance, the UK often likes to maintain that, okay, we still maintain ultimate sovereign authority over decisions to actually use the nuclear weapons, but their dependence on the US actually affects this the so-called operational independence. That's it. Thank you.
And Joan, if you'd like to ask your question.
Hello, are you talking to me, Joan? All right.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. No, my question was about France and the UK. It's been answered. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Paul and Dave, if you'd like to.
Yes. Well, I will answer that one on nuclear command and control and other dimensions. Yes, there's a lot of integration, but there is also a lot of independence. I'll give you an example. The Trident missiles have a number of guidance facilities. The assumption would be that if it was fired independently of the US, it would not be able to use GPS, but it does also have stellar navigation by the stars and also other guidance systems. It means that the accuracy would be significantly degraded, but you could still launch and you could still land it. So in theory, that's what we're told. But we're often told they are operationally independent, but there is coordination that goes on. The British ballistic missile submarines are given a quadrant in the ocean to patrol. We tell the Americans not where the submarine actually is, but roughly where it is. to the best. I mean, because nobody knows where it is in the UK either. It's only 3 people on the submarine itself that know the precise location. So there is a degree of independent operation. It's very difficult to separate out entirely because the systems are heavily integrated. And the British system is often justified back here as an independent nuclear deterrent. And then it is justified in Brussels as a British contribution to NATO operations. The Prime Minister has sole authority to launch, unless, of course, the Prime Minister's gone, in which case it's the submarine commander. But that would happen in the midst of a NATO operation where the request to launch would come from the Supreme Allied Commander. So yes, it's deliberately vague, and I think that means that it's very difficult to see it as a fully independent system. There was a question in the chat about the F-35s being that the Americans could probably take them over. The thing is to see the F-35 a bit like the most modern types of electric car. They're not so much a car as a traveling computer, and the F-35s are the cutting edge dimensions in them are far more around sensors and compute capabilities with weapon systems attached, going at high speed. And as such, they are highly networked and integrated. So it would, for the same reasons that I believe that it's highly likely the Americans have a kill switch on the Tridents that they lend us. So too, I think that it's very likely that the F-35s have the ability to be controlled remotely. In fact, it really doesn't make sense to be putting pilots inside them at all, because that limits their capability, their ability to go at great speed and to maneuver without the pilot blacking out. The only reason why they're putting people in them is because we as human beings, and particularly the institutions that run these things, are highly conservative in their attitude. And that's why we spend so much money on 5th generation aircraft when it's far more efficient to be spending money on, for military purposes on drones and missiles. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, I don't have a huge amount to add. I think, yeah, with to Akopi's question, yes, I think when defenders of the UK's system talk about independence, they're talking about a theoretically, technically independent firing chain and an ability to fire a missile without the US being in the command and control and firing chain. But the whole system is set up to that there is no political independence. The UK might be able to fire a nuclear missile on Monday, but what will the US do on Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday if they don't like that? It's an illusion of independence, really.
Thank you both. I'm now going to abuse my position as chair again and ask Dr. Tim Street.
Oh, you don't have to abuse your position, you're the chair. I was just interested, seeing as everything's going on in the Middle East and the Iran war at the moment and the conflict over there, is that some commentators have highlighted the possibility that it might go nuclear. For example, if Israel's continually hit by Iranian missiles, that it might turn to its own nuclear weapons to launch a nuclear strike against Iran, and then that might draw in China and Russia. So just wondered if you had any thoughts about the current state of affairs in that conflict and the nuclear dimension. Thanks.
I think to be honest, it's scary enough. I don't think it's likely that the Israelis will use nuclear weapons. The reason why they acquired nuclear weapons, well, two core reasons. Firstly, was as a way of blackmailing the Americans to keep supplying and standing beside them. Now the Americans are beside them, so there's no blackmail required there, or at least not of the nuclear variety, maybe the Epstein variety. The other reason for acquiring nuclear weapons was as a Samson option. The Samson option is largely around the invasion of Israel, not about dominating a country the other side of the region. They know that Iran is nowhere near having a nuclear weapon themselves, and that was an excuse. So I think there are all sorts of good reasons for being scared about nuclear weapons, but I would put a dampener on the fear that the Israelis are going to use nuclear weapons anytime soon in this conflict. I think it's far, far more likely that the Iranians will resist and continue to land missiles across the region, and including in Israel, that there's going to be a lot of hurt and pain across the region, and that people will tire at some point, and that both sides will claim victory, and that we will have another war in 5 or 6 years' time.
Yes, I would agree with that. I'm not an expert on the Israeli program, but from my understanding, we don't know very much about what their threshold for use would be. But I think it is important to see the development of it in the context of the mid 20th century, where there was a realistic land invasion threat from hostile neighbors. That's largely dissipated, and I think the likely outcome of the war is for a lot of conventional harm to be done, but for Israel to maintain air superiority over Iran and continue to drop bombs on it, and Iran to continue to retaliate in the way that it has. I'm concerned about a cycle of violence. I'm concerned about all the people who will die, and I'm concerned about where internationally will go with that regional instability alongside all of the other terrible things that are happening in the world. I'm less concerned about a nuclear dimension to this particular conflict.
Thank you both. And just before we wrap up, I see Dick, all right, you have a hand raised.
Just the thought that, can we take the current situation as evidence that the nuclear powers, it's not a deterrent for Israel. They're getting attacked in spite of the fact that they have nuclear power. So is that a good argument against the idea that the nuclear capabilities actually do deter?
Yes, Dick. Simple answer. Yes, it's a good argument. It's one that's been made very cogently at great length by Ward Wilson in his 5 myths about nuclear deterrence. And I would recommend anybody. It's very accessible, easy, shortish read. And he talks about numerous examples where nuclear deterrence has failed to deter non-nuclear weapon states from attacking nuclear weapon states. And indeed, some of those examples are from the Middle East themselves. So yes, again, we have an example where the nuclear deterrent has failed but on the other hand, it's a weaker example than previous examples. I mean, I'm thinking of the War of 73, for example, which is a much clearer example. In this case, it was 2 nuclear weapon states attacking a non-nuclear weapon state. And in that respect, maybe they thought that their nuclear weapons were a shield. Certainly, Greenpeace in the early 2000s were talking about Trident being used as a shield for British intervention abroad. So there is clearly a belief, not necessarily in nuclear coercion, but in nuclear deterrence being used as a protection for imperialist actions on the other side of the world. It's quite clear that nuclear weapon states, perhaps bar China, that's a debatable one, have deeply colonialist attitudes that live on, and that we see them acting. And perhaps the nuclear weapons are a facilitating tool for that.
Thank you, Dave. Do you have any comments before we wrap up?
Not on that. I think that was on point and exhaustive.
Excellent, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us today. If you'd like to learn more about British Pugwash and how to join, we'll be posting a link in the chat. One of the next activities for British Pugwash is the Student Young Pugwash UK conference, which is on the 20th of March. It can be joined online or in person, and again, we'll be posting links in the chat. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and most importantly, thank you to Paul and Dave for your presentations. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'll be uploading this video to the website. So you can join British Pugwash as a member and you can receive updates on all our future events. But yeah, thank you to Olivia for chairing today, who did a great job. And thanks to excellent speakers and for everyone with your great questions, and see you soon.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.